We're going to spend most of our time in the book of James. James chapter 3 is where we'll begin. Or maybe James chapter 1. Well, we'll be in James. We'll figure it out when we get there. And the reason for that is because James is one of those writers that had a lot to say about a lot of practical things. And when it comes to the tongue, well, he didn't bite his tongue. He says a lot about it. So we're going to read what he says and make application. He really just hits hard. We know, as we've been looking at stewardship, that stewardship means being a good manager or controlling whatever's been given to us. Later on, we might look at, I believe the workbook has a lesson on the body or maybe on dress or things of that nature. And that's all it's talking about. That's all it's trying to get across to us is that we learn how to be proper managers of whatever has been entrusted to us. So some of the topics that James addresses in his short epistle are these that are on the screen. Specifically, he is saying, if you're going to say that you're a Christian, you need to live like one in every aspect of your life. Don't just come to church. Don't wear a little sign of the cross or a fish on your car, bumper sticker. Don't do none of those things except live like a Christian. One of the Pharisees' problems was that they understood all 600 plus or they thought they understood all 600 plus laws of the Old Testament. And they had an interpretation for every one of those things. Instead of just taking, as Jesus said, what's the first and foremost commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind. And the second one is like unto it. Love your neighbor just like the Lord. And then Paul later comes on and he gives us the interpretation that the second one and the first one aren't really first and second. They're the same. Because you can't love God without loving your neighbor. You can't love your neighbor without loving your God. So James is going to make this list throughout his entire epistle. Don't say that you're a Christian. Live like that in every aspect of your life. Your finances, your relationship with your husband, with your wife, with your children, your business, and how you dress and how you speak and how you treat each other. In your benevolence, when you see a person that is in need, don't just say to them, well, I wish you well, my thoughts and prayers with you, but actually do something about it. So in every aspect of your life, be a Christian. Don't just say it. Because there's one thing that I believe the world can identify in a Christian very, very quickly, and that's hypocrisy. And there's a lot of folks, not just Christians, but a lot of folks in different professions that say one thing but live a different way. So the tongue is indeed something that gets us into trouble. James is going to describe how small of a member of the body it is, but yet how much trouble it causes. Someone said here recently, I know what the Bible says about the tongue, but I have such a hard time controlling it. And I understand. This is so easy to use it, isn't it? It's so easy to just let it loose. We often say, I say what's on my mind, and that's just who I am. Well, James is saying, I don't want you to be who you are. I don't want you to use that as an excuse. I want you to learn how to control it, self-control. And again, stewardship is being a proper manager, in this case, of the tongue. So James chapter 1, verse 19. This you know, my beloved brethren. So it's amazing how James begins this whole section with the words, this you know. One of the phrases I hated to hear from my mother's mouth was, "How many times do I have to tell you?" It was a broken record. And this is what James is doing. This you already know. I'm not telling you anything new. I'm being inspired by the Spirit to write these things. I'm being moved by the Spirit. But you already know this. The other writers have already told you. If you are a Jew, you've read this in Proverbs already. You've read it in the Psalms. You've read it throughout the history of the Jews. This you already know, my beloved brethren. But everyone must be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger. Notice the progression here. The last time you lost your cool, did you get angry before you spoke, or did you get angrier the more you spoke? Yeah, so this is why he's saying you need to open up your ears. God's giving you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen more, speak less. And that will produce the desired effect. Slow to anger. Verse 26, if anyone thinks himself to be religious, and yet does not bridle his tongue, deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless. If you are looking for a book in the Bible that's going to make you feel good, don't read James. As this man kicks you right in the gut. About everything. And right here's a prime example. If you think you're religious, but yet you can't control your tongue, your religion is worthless. So it's not a Song of Solomon, you're so beautiful, your breath smells like mints, your teeth looks like pomegranates. It's not that. Matthew 12:34, you brood of vipers. Wow, Jesus, what's wrong with you? What made Jesus so upset? How can you, being evil, speak what is good? For the mouth speaks out of which fills the heart. And there was a point when a discussion that Jesus had with some Jews that had a bone to pick with Jesus. He said, they said to Jesus, we noticed that your disciples, they're a little nasty. This was obviously pre-COVID. They don't wash their hands before they eat. And that's not proper hygiene. That's not sanitary. Well, I heard a sermon at Black Creek not too long ago. The preacher said, you come to my house, I don't care if you wash your hands or not, you're going to put that food in your mouth, not mine. Such hillbilly. But he's right. And Jesus comes back and says, look, you've got this whole thing backwards. What's in your heart is what really matters. And not only what's in your heart is what matters, but many times we say, well, I said that, and I said hurtful things, but I really didn't mean it. What does Jesus say? If it came out of your mouth, where was it? It's in your heart. Now, we may be sorry that we said it. We may be very remorseful that we said it, but it came from the heart. So this sister in Christ, she was driving up and down the street one early Monday morning, and she noticed that Brother George's bicycle was parked in front of the bar. And she went home and picked up that phone. Her excuse was, I'm really concerned about Brother George. So she called 4 or 5 other sisters that, they have the same, I'm really concerned about Brother George. And Brother George, I bet he was just passed out. He had one of those moments of weaknesses, went to the bar, got plastered. His bicycle is in front of the Crowbar Inn. And then that phone tree just lit up. Come Wednesday night, Brother George walks in. He's always the first one at church to turn on the lights. But these sisters and brethren were there before he was. And they were going to administer justice on him. They were going to withdraw from him because, Brother George, you're drunk. You're an alcoholic. So he explained to them what his bike was doing at the bar Monday morning very early. He was there picking up the aluminum cans to recycle them. And the sister said, oh, well, you have to avoid every appearance of evil. If you don't want people to think you're drunk, your bike should not be at the bar. He said, okay, fine, I take the admonishment. Well, that evening, he snuck up to Sister's good intention house, and he parked his bike in her porch and left it there overnight. And then he started the phone tree. And somebody started saying, well, Brother George and Sister Good Intentions are having an affair because his bicycle was at her porch. You see, why would we do things like that? One of the biggest problems we have with our tongue is obviously what James says, we just don't know how to control it. But I want to take it a step further. We don't use it for the right things. So let's say Brother George is concerned because his bicycle is parked right in front of the Crowbar Inn in a small community, and that doesn't look right. So maybe I need to go talk to Brother George and not the phone tree. Got it? Make sense? The problem with the tongue, as James points out as well, is that it never says just what it's supposed to say. It says either too much or too little. Now I'm not saying, you got that? I'm not saying, but I'm just saying. We do those things because we want to interject some type of prejudice. And somebody once said that the tongue is that muscle that just gets worked too much. The word tongue is used 129 times, 33 times in the New Testament, 5 times in 4 verses in the book of James. So if James uses it 5 times in 4 verses, what do you think he's trying to tell us? Shut up. Right? This is important. It's the Holy Spirit's way of telling us this is important. And James usually does not use the word tongue in the context of this is positive. He uses it in the context of negative because we usually use it to destroy it. Once we say things, it's hard to take it back, isn't it? There's certain phrases that describe someone that talks too much, like a motor mouth. Or we say to children that are being bullied, don't worry what they say about you because sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Oh, that is so far from the truth. You try consoling a child that has Down syndrome, but is high functioning. Try consoling them when a whole bunch of kids call them retarded and say, oh, don't worry about it, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Or a young lady that is suffering with weight, and the friends call her fat. Try to console her by saying sticks and it doesn't. The lady that came to the preacher and said, I've gossiped, I destroyed this marriage by spreading rumors, and we're not true. I'm so sorry. I've gone to them. I've made amends. I've said I'm sorry. Preacher, what can I do? So they go up to the building with a pillow, feathered pillow, cut it open, and he says, now take that pillow and just empty it all out. And the wind took the feathers, and there goes the feathers. Now he said, go gather all those feathers and put them back in the pillow. She said, that's impossible. He said, those are words spoken. Once they're gone, you can't take them back. The damage is done. So the warning is, be careful what you say. And here's another admonition with be careful what you say. Be careful who you say it to, because when that person repeats it, now don't quote me on this, you know what that means? I'm going to add to it. Don't quote me to, I'm not sure. So if you're not sure and don't quote me on it, what should you probably not do? Not say anything, right? One time I was, we had spent about 4 hours in the business meeting, and boy, thank God we have elders. And we had to, and it was just on simple, what color carpet. 4 hours. And when we left that business meeting, one of the men came and said, you know, Brother Ed, I don't like the way Brother John, I said, oh, wait a second. Brother John, you see this man here? Brother, whatever his name is, he says he doesn't like the way you spoke, so both of you just iron it out, and I walked away. That man never came to me again with another gossip. That's the way you handle gossip. Might not like you, but that's the way you handle it. Luke 6:45, the good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth what is evil, for his mouth speaks from that which fills the heart. It comes from the heart. So then James says, let not many of you become teachers, in James 3 and verse 1. What? You talk about contrasts and trying to reconcile some of these things. Let not many of you become teachers. Why? Because in the day of judgment, those of you and me that teach will stand before the throne of God and have to give an account for every single thing that we have said. We will incur, as the scripture says, a stricter judgment. Not only this, but notice in verse 2, because we all stumble in many ways. Now I've added the phrase, but most of all in what we say. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, that man is perfect. And he's able to bridle not only the tongue, but the whole body as well. Now, we force a beast to obey, but we cannot control our tongues. If we put the bits into the horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set to flame by such a great fire. Verse 8, but no one can tame the tongue. We can tame whales, we can tame dolphins, we can control a ship with a small rudder, we can do a lot of things. But he says there is no man that can control or tame the tongue. It is, notice this, a restless evil and full of poison. That is powerful terminology, isn't it? And it's trying to invoke this mental picture of a serpent. Who is the father of lies? And who is the one that introduced death into the world? And how did he do this? By speaking a lie. So this is why James says, no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. Ooh, child, I've got some gossip I got to share with you. I just can't wait. We got a lot to catch up on. And now the text, right? Those thumbs are so sore because we text so much. Verse 11. Does a fountain send out from the same opening both fresh and bitter water? No, not naturally, but the tongue does. Can a fig tree, my brethren, produce olives, or a vine produce figs? Nor can salt water produce fresh. So again, James is illustrating all of this to make the point do not many of you become teachers, because every person will stumble at one point or another in what he or she says. And you will have to give an account for everything that you have said. And all teachers will have to take the responsibility of teaching serious. And, I think James leads to the point that if you're going to be in leadership and you can't control your tongue, then maybe you ought not to be in leadership. Right? I have said from this pulpit several times that I have an open door policy. I'm willing to talk with anybody, to study with anyone, to pray with anyone, to counsel with anyone. And what we say, what we speak is confidential if that's the way you want it to be. And that when I go home and my wife says, "Who'd you meet with today?" If it was confidential, I'll say, "Well, I met with someone." And that's as far as it goes. But many times it is tempting to be able to bounce ideas off someone else. And one could use the excuse, "Well, I really need help with this. It's not gossip, but just what do you think?" But if you're going to be in leadership or in a position, as James is talking about, you've got to control it or get out of it. You just have to do that. Luke chapter 12, verse 48. But the one who did not know it and committed deeds worthy of a flogging will receive but a few. Notice this. But from everyone who has been given much, this is the not so many of you become teachers. The one who has been given much will be required much, and to whom they entrusted much of him, they will ask all the more. So, I often say, I think Benjamin mentioned when he taught the class on the stewardship at a time, I was 24 years old when I was asked to write that lesson. I was the wrong person to ask, because as a 23, 24-year-old, I had no idea of what a good steward of time was. But I wrote it. But I was hard on preachers, as Benjamin pointed out, because I was talking about me. Most churches don't supervise a preacher's time, right? We are our own managers of time. Most churches don't say you have office hours. Most churches don't say, "Give me a log of what you've been doing, who you've been talking to." They don't do that. We have to be honest. We have to put enough time in our study and our reading for personal growth and for the church's growth. We have to be honest, because much has been entrusted to us and much will be required of us as teachers. And what we say is also applicable to that. So there are three truths, and we're going to look at them from verses 3 through 9 about the tongue. How much time do I have? I've not been paying attention. Three truths about the tongue. It is small but powerful, isn't it? I mean, unless you're that, what was that lead singer for Kiss? What was his name? They could tickle his belly button with it. See, that's adding to it. That's an exaggeration. It's necessary but dangerous. Now, you want to quibble about that. Tommy McLean would quibble with me. Well, you don't need a tongue. In this case, anything to communicate, right? It's helpful, but inconsistent. And that's why James says that the one that is able to bridle his tongue is perfect, and is also able to bridle his entire body. So let's look at this small but powerful when he talks about the horse's bit. You know, the bit is really small. If you've ever worked with horses, we had a couple of Clydesdales. Those are the huge animals. We had some mules as well. We took a trip to the Grand Canyon. I was about 20 pounds shy of 400 pounds, the biggest fellow in the group, and they gave everybody some nice horses, and they brought out a big old nasty mule for me. It was a subliminal message that I was overweight. And with each step it took, it told me it didn't like it. And had a bit in its mouth, and it didn't respect the bit. It was a huge beast, as was I. And that tickled Benjamin. Look at him. And I would do a lot to try to make that beast to move, and it wouldn't. So here comes the guide that he puts on my boots, the little spur, a small spur. He said, just give it a gentle nudge. You'll get that thing to move right in the flank. Well, that mule was about that big around, you know. And that spur was already in the flank. I gave it a gentle nudge, and it didn't budge. So I gave it a strong nudge. That thing took off. And the guide said, that spur is small but sharp. It'll control that animal. Be careful. Well, the tongue, that animal's out of control. The tongue is the same way. It's so small, but yet we just can't control it. Why can we not control it? I think the reason is because we don't want to control it many times. You know, the person that says, now I don't like drama, you know what they like? Drama. Oh, I just love drama. And James, you know, he makes uses all these illustrations about the ship's rudder, and that, you know, it's such a small thing like a spark in the forest, and that sets the whole forest aflame. Notice James 3, verse 3. He says, now we put the bits into the horse's mouth so that they will obey us. We direct their entire body, then the rudder and the ship and all those things. But notice what he says in verse 4. Or verse 5, rather. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. I want you to look at the word boast for a little bit. Or let us look at the word boast for a little bit. What comes to mind when you see the word boast? I think of Muhammad Ali. He boasted a lot, didn't he? I mean, he could back it up, but he boasted a lot. Yeah. The tongue loves to boast about itself. And it is necessary to communicate, as James says there in verse 6, and the tongue is a fire. The very world of iniquity, the tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body. It sets afire an entire forest, verse 8. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. How many teeth do we have? Anybody know? Anybody know how many teeth we have? 32 teeth surround our tongue. And yet we still can't control it. That's saying something in it. And by the way, I'm going to give you a test here, or an exercise. And I want everybody to participate, please. Say the word gossip without hissing. Say it, go ahead. Gossip without hissing. You can't. Gossip is from the serpent. Gossip is from the devil. So when you look at your workbook, what the author leads up to is, instead of using your tongue to destroy, you should use your tongue to build up. Right? And that's what we should be concerned about, at least the author's point of view. My whole concern is what James is concerned about. We understand that we should build up, but our biggest problem is that we don't build up, we destroy. And the more we're reminded about this, as James says, this you already know, or this you know, the more we're reminded about this from love, gentle admonition, and encouragement, the better off we'll be. Because communication is necessary. Proper communication is what's needed. We need to build up and not tear down. Any questions or comments? Thank you.